to introduce Angus Macaulay, President of the South Carolina Bar, to you today. Mr. Macaulay received his BA in English from Sewanee, his law degree from the University of South Carolina School of Law. He's a member of the Nexon Pruitt Law Firm, where he practices in the area of employment and labor law, among others, and is also a certified mediator. Mr. Macaulay has a distinguished history of service to the bar and to the community. He has served as chair of the board of directors of the South Carolina Cancer Center, for example. He has also been a very active member of the South Carolina Bar, in addition to serving as president. He was president of the Young Lawyers Division, and he's been a member of the House of Delegates. In 2003, the University of South Carolina School of Law Alumni Association honored him with its Complete Lawyer Silver Award, which recognizes attorneys for competence, ethics, and integrity. And last, but certainly not least, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Mr. Macaulay, as known to me, Angus, because he is my first cousin. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dean Lawton. The cousins of the Macaulay and Lawton clans spent many grand times growing up together. My brother, sister, and I always looked up to Dean Lawton. Dean Abrams, members of the board, students, faculty, you'll be gratified to know that when she was growing up, the Charleston School of Law's Associate Dean for Academic Affairs was a complete and utter goody two-shoes. Much to the disgust of at least one of her cousins. There was a point in my childhood when I said that if I heard one more time, "Why can't you be more like your cousin Margaret?" I would have run away and joined the circus. Dean Lawton and I share a grandfather. I'll talk about him a little bit more in a bit. And I recently found a letter that our grandfather had written about Dean Lawton. I figured out that Dean Lawton was 2 years old when that letter was written, and I had not yet been born. In his letter, our grandfather wrote, and I quote, "Margaret, Dean Lawton, is one of the most attractive and beautiful children I have ever met. Not only being smart, she is most engaging." Are you kidding me? My first thought was, well, I can't tell you what my first thought was because it wouldn't be appropriate in this very nice setting here today. My second thought was, give me a break. She was only 2 years old. And my third thought was that Dean Lawton was already making me look bad because I had not even been born yet. On behalf of the South Carolina Bar, thank y'all for the opportunity to speak with you today. The South Carolina Bar is made up of about 14,000 lawyers. If you choose to practice law in South Carolina after you graduate, and I hope you do, then you will enroll in the South Carolina Bar after you pass the bar exam and are sworn in. People often ask me what specifically the bar does. We have a long constitutional definition that sets out the bar's purpose with a lot of semicolons and commas. I prefer to describe the bar as having 3 specific duties. The first is to assist the South Carolina judiciary. The second is to assist and support South Carolina lawyers. And the third duty of the South Carolina Bar, and I think the most important one, is to support and assist South Carolinians. The bar pursues projects that accomplish those 3 goals. The South Carolina Bar understands that you all undergo, at this time in your life, while you're in law school, many stresses. Additionally, and more importantly, the bar understands that you may have great concerns about the opportunities that will be available to you after you graduate from the Charleston School of Law. None of us needed to have read the recent article in the Post and Courier to understand that the legal market has changed much in the past several years, particularly since I graduated from law school in 1990. I hope that you will allow the South Carolina Bar to assist you both now and after you graduate. I hope that you will allow the South Carolina Bar to provide you with the opportunities that are available to you both now and after you graduate. The Bar recently asked the South Carolina Supreme Court to create a law student division. We see this as a chance for law students to get involved in the South Carolina Bar, to help with our projects, and perhaps most important to y'all, to allow you to get to know and interact with attorneys from throughout South Carolina, and for them to get to know you. After you graduate from law school, and if you practice in South Carolina, the Bar has all kinds of benefits available to you at no or little cost. The Bar maintains a posting of available jobs that we can assist you in setting up a law practice. The South Carolina Bar supports the Charleston School of Law, and we want to support y'all in any way we can. If you can think of anything that the South Carolina Bar can do to help you, please call me. If she's still claiming me after today, Dean Lawton will give you my number. Otherwise, come find me after we finish talking here today together, and let's talk about it. My father was a lawyer in Richmond, Virginia. My father was also involved in politics, so he sometimes put a certain spin on things when he believed that it was necessary or helpful. As a result, when I was 7 years old, someone asked me what it was my father did for a living, and I told them that he made money and gave it to the poor people. My daughter is 4 years old, and she asked me the other day what my job is. I knew that I could not possibly explain what an attorney does to a 4-year-old, but I wanted her to understand that we do good things. Furthermore, as a parent, we all want to look good in the eyes of our children. So I fudged the truth a tad bit. I'm not proud of that fact, but I thought it was necessary. I told my daughter that Batman calls me when he needs help beating up the bad people. And my daughter accepted that explanation. But I was left to wonder, how am I going to describe what I do when my daughter gets older and she calls bull on my job description as Batman's executive assistant? But I can also ask y'all, what are you going to say once you graduate from the Charleston School of Law and pass the bar exam when someone asks you what your job is? I recently suffered a disappointment in my life. It was not a professional disappointment, it was not a personal disappointment, but it was a disappointment nonetheless. The disappointment occurred when I read that Steven Tyler, lead singer and frontman of the seminal rock and roll band Aerosmith, announced that he would no longer sit at the desk and judge the American Idol singing competition. You all were disappointed too. Mr. Tyler, or Steven, I may be so bold, when reflecting on his resignation said, and I quote, "It was a great job. I sat next to J-Lo, and I made a ton of money. It was a moment in my life, and it became larger than my life." And by the way, J-Lo is actually Jennifer Lopez, who's a pretty attractive, I think, singer and actress. But anyway, putting aside my disappointment at Steven's decision, I started thinking about what he said in the context of the practice of law. As lawyers, should we consider what we do to be a job and strive to make tons of money? And if we consider being a lawyer making tons of money to be a job, do we then become larger than life? I read somewhere that Southerners sometimes look for a family tree under every scrub brush they encounter. Since I was coming to speak with you all today, I thought that we could use Dean Lawton's family tree to consider this question of whether the practice of law is a job or possibly something more. As I mentioned to you earlier, Dean Lawton and I share a grandfather whose name also happened to be Angus Macaulay. My grandfather grew up and lived in a small town northwest of here called Chester, South Carolina. Chester is the county seat of Chester County and is a mix of industry and cattle farming. I never knew our grandfather. He died in 1964 when I was but a few months old. I understood that he was a lawyer. Other than that, he remained, for much of my youth, essentially a bald, fat guy whose portrait hung in our grandmother's living room. I do have one memory of our grandfather. I recall my father describing our grandfather's funeral, and he said that when they came out of the church, the streets of Chester, South Carolina were filled with people. The streets were filled with people. So I wondered what it was about this bald-headed fat guy that caused folks to fill the streets of Chester, South Carolina. He could not have been that great of an attorney. He certainly could not have had that many clients that would fill the streets of Chester County, because Chester didn't have that many attorneys at that time. A few years later, I read some articles and obituaries about our grandfather. Those articles and obituaries certainly mentioned his law practice in Chester, the fact that he represented the railroad and represented Chester County for several years. However, those articles primarily focused on our grandfather's involvement in various civic organizations, such as serving as a church deacon, college trustee, and president of state and local chambers of commerce. So I began to understand, while some of those people who filled the streets of Chester may have been clients of our grandfather, most were probably there because he had affected their lives through his civic activities that he undertook in addition to his law practice. Dean Lawton grew up in a small town southwest of here called Allendale, South Carolina. Allendale is even smaller than Chester. Dean Lawton and her two thug-like brothers. I say that because they used to beat me up when I was young. Don't tell me, I guess. They had wonderful childhoods growing up in Chester, but they would certainly agree that there was not a whole lot going on in Allendale after the cows were put up in the barn at night. Dean Lawton's father was a wonderful man named Thomas Oregon Lawton, but I called him Uncle Tom. Tom Lawton was one of those rare adults who would always take the time to answer a child's question, no matter how silly the question was. Tom was a lawyer in Allendale, and he practiced law in a county which, according to the historian Walter Edgar, was the poorest county in the state of South Carolina. Tom Lawton died in 2005, and I remember his memorial service well. Many folks traveled from near and far to pay tribute to him. As I looked over the crowded memorial service, I remember thinking that this was a lot of folks for a man who practiced law in a small, poor, rural county. Those who shared memories of Tom certainly talked about his law practice, the fact that he was president of the Allendale County Bar, and that he had represented Allendale County for many years. But they spoke mostly about Tom's love of history, and how Tom had used his love of history for the benefit of the state when he led the statewide celebration of South Carolina's 300th birthday. In fact, Dean Lawton's father received an award for developing and promoting South Carolina's history in tourism. So it occurred to me that Dean Lawton's grandfather and Dean Lawton's father probably didn't make a ton of money practicing law in the small communities where they lived. Yet they had a ton of folks who honored them because they touched and affected people's lives in a positive way through their community service. Service for which they were not paid, but they must have believed that community service was a necessary component of their law practice. So it seems that lawyers whose law practice is defined solely by the clients they represent and the money they earn have law jobs. But lawyers whose practice is defined both by their service to their clients and their service to the community are part of the legal profession. If you look up the word profession in the dictionary, the definition includes the word calling. Attorneys become larger in life when they look upon the practice of law not as a job, but as a calling to do more for their community. And it is for this reason that Grandfather Macaulay and Tom Lawton are, for Dean Lawton and me, larger than life. Now, some of you may say that if you're a big fish in a little pond, it is easy to get involved in small communities and affect people's lives. I disagree. I recently heard a presentation by Ted Olson. You all may have heard of him. Mr. Olson was President George W. Bush's Solicitor General. As a Solicitor General, Mr. Olson argued before the United States Supreme Court on behalf of the Bush administration. Since he went into private practice, his cases include representation of a wide range of clients and causes, some quite controversial, including representing convicted spy Jonathan Collins. While Mr. Olson could certainly be viewed as a great lawyer who probably makes a ton of money, I'm sure that there are many who may disagree, and I'm sure there are many who may disagree with the clients he's represented and the causes he has supported. When I heard Mr. Olson, he was speaking about his leadership of the American Bar Association's task force on the preservation of the justice system. This task force is working to ensure that Americans, no matter where they live, no matter what their background is, get access to justice through our judicial system. It occurred to me that, though you may disagree with Mr. Olson's legal positions, his efforts to provide justice for all of us makes him a part of the legal profession and thus larger than life. There are many, many lawyers in South Carolina who give back to their community through their legal practice. Some of them are sitting in this room right now. Dick Riley is an attorney in Greenville. In addition to his law practice, his call was to pursue ways to improve education in South Carolina, and he ran for and was elected governor of the state on that platform. That calling to improve education directly led to his being appointed by President Clinton Secretary of Education. So thus, Secretary Riley not only had a positive effect on the Greenville community where he lived and practiced law, he also touched the lives of South Carolinians, and he also touched the lives of Americans. The highest and greatest award that is given by the South Carolina Bar is the Durant Award. The Durant Award is given once a year to an attorney who gives meritorious service, not only to the bar, but also to the community. Secretary Riley has received the Durant Award. Judge Sanders has received the Durant Award. But please remember that you do not need to be a governor, a Supreme Court advocate, a cabinet secretary to pursue the calling of the legal profession and change people's lives for the better. All you have to do is take an interest in your community and participate in your community. So in closing, let us return to the cause of my original disappointment, Mr. Stephen Tyler. If you should happen to get a position after you graduate from the Charleston School of Law, making tons of money, sitting next to J-Lo, with someone who looks like J-Lo, first of all, I hope you'll drop me a line. Give me a call, send me an email, amacaulay@nextpruitt.com. Let me know where you're working, because I might want to apply for a position there too. But secondly, I hope that you will all consider or remember that your law practice is not a job, but it is a profession. And if someone should ask you what you do, I hope that you will respond and tell them that you serve your clients and you serve your community. For this thing we do, this practice of law, it is not a job. The practice of law is a profession, and in this profession, more is expected of us. We are held to a higher standard. We also have obligations. We have obligations to each other as lawyers, and we have obligations to the people of the state and the communities where we choose to make our home and where we choose to practice law. I truly believe this, and I hope that you all believe this too. Thank you very much.